Hello friends, Lee C. Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Jeff Chu. Jeff was a highly successful journalist and writer working for folks like Time Magazine and Fast Company. And when he was about 39, he was standing, I think it was on the 29th floor of a gleaming steel and glass tower in Manhattan, looking down at the street and wondering what it was he was doing with his life. And he allowed himself to ask the big perennial existential questions that so often we run into in our lives. What does it mean to live some sort of life of purpose? What does it mean to do work in the world that we think contributes to the world? And those questions led him to leave his successful career as a journalist. And then he found his way to Princeton Theological Seminary, and especially their Farminary, where he spent a lot of time on their farm reflecting upon those perennial existential questions. It's a lovely interview. Here's Jeff Chu. Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter.
Every Christmas, I think about the gifts that really matter. Not the wrapped ones under the tree, but the ones that change someone's life forever. And recently, I heard a story from Mercy Ships that I just can't shake. A mom brought her little boy on board. He'd been living with a condition that could be fixed with a simple surgery, but there was no surgeon anywhere near his village. After his free operation, she said, "You've given my son his future back." Y'all, that is a Christmas gift. Globally, 5 billion people lack access to surgical care. In sub-Saharan Africa, there's only one surgeon for every 200,000 people. But Mercy Ships is stepping into that gap in the most beautiful way, bringing free, life-transforming surgeries to people who would otherwise have no access to care. They help the blind see, they straighten twisted limbs, they remove deadly tumors, they treat cleft conditions, and so much more. With state-of-the-art hospital ships, they provide safe surgery for children and adults completely free of charge. And it's all powered by an all-volunteer crew of surgeons, nurses, engineers, cooks, people who give their time and talents to make the world better. And here's where we get to help. Your donation provides free, safe surgeries to people in desperate need of hope. This Christmas, you can make your impact felt, and every gift is matched. Please donate today at mercyships.org/podcast. That's mercyships.org/podcast. You know how every year there's that one holiday moment that becomes a family favorite, like showing up to a Christmas dinner and bringing a dish that turns out to be the hit of the night? That's what could happen if you bring Omaha steaks, you guys, because nothing says I love you and also please invite me back next year like showing up with the world's best steaks. From holiday hosting to those unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience. You can gift family and friends USDA certified tender steaks, juicy burgers, cozy comfort meals, and so much more. And right now, during their Sizzle All the Way sale, you can get 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our friends get an extra $35 off with the promo code FUN at checkout. There's nothing like receiving a gift of Omaha Steaks. Everything shows up perfectly packed, super convenient, and the flavor, exceptional. Their filet mignons are unreal, USDA certified, very tender, and every order is backed by their 100% guarantee. They've been America's original butcher since 1917, a family-owned company with over 100 years of expertise, and you taste that care in every bite. It's not just steaks, burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, dessert, they've got everything. So save big on gourmet gifts and more holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide during their Sizzle All the Way sale. And for an extra $35 off, just use the promo code FUN at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, and the code is FUN. Jeff Chu is an award-winning journalist and editor-at-large at Travel and Leisure.
He's a former Time staff writer and Fast Company editor, and his work has also appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and Modern Farmer. He's the co-author with Rachel Held Evans of the New York Times bestseller Wholehearted Faith. And in his weekly newsletter, Notes of a Make-Believe Farmer, he writes about spirituality, gardening, food, travel, and culture. Today we're discussing his new book, Good Soil, The Education of an Accidental Farmhand. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Pleasure to have you with us today. You share early on in your most recent book about working successfully in New York and one day in a shiny Manhattan skyscraper, steel glass, 29 stories up, and wondering about the meaning or the lack thereof of the work that you're doing. So you kind of take us back into that moment and what that moment meant for you in your unfolding life.
I remember standing at the window of my office building, looking down at all these folks who were scurrying out of the subway exits first thing in the morning and thinking, what is work for? What makes work matter? And the office was pretty empty at that hour. I was looking at the pages of the upcoming issue of the magazine, and I realized we were putting out a luxury product. And by that, I mean, if it disappeared tomorrow, it probably wouldn't make much of a difference in people's lives. And I wanted to do work that did make a difference in people's lives. This is not a unique thought. I think there are many of us who wonder, what are we working so hard for? What are we doing in the world? Why am I spending all these hours investing in whatever I'm putting out into the world? And that was a real epiphany moment for me, except that I felt the nudge away from something before I could understand what I was drawn to.
What did it take for you to lean more into that line of questioning of yourself or to allow yourself to explore new possibilities?
Time and some arguments with my husband because I didn't know how to manage my anxiety, and discernment, which often took the form of conversations with friends who were willing to listen and to sit in that place of ambiguity and to puzzle through things with me. And it wasn't a quick process. I think vocational questions, questions of call, they often are answered over years, not months or days. And I think that's something that I really would tell anybody else who is thinking about whether they need a change of vocation, that you have to be patient with yourself. Sometimes it is about answering the call away from something before you know what you're called to. Sometimes it is going to be a stop and start process. Sometimes there is going to be frustration because you don't exactly know what step you're going to take next.
You, in talking about that season of your life, at one point you say, rage is misery that doesn't know where else to go. How did rage play into that for you? What was the sort of inner landscape of your emotional experience as you're processing these questions?
There was so much inner discontent in my spirit, and often I would take it out on my husband. It ended up with me picking fights for no good reason because I had this negative, frustrated energy that had to go somewhere. And I didn't have healthy channels for it. And I inflicted it on the person who was closest to me, who was my husband. One example of a stupid fight that I picked was I got irritated at him for sitting on the same spot on our sofa every night after work. That's ridiculous. We lived in a small Brooklyn apartment. And because I think I was so frustrated at my inability to move, to make choices, to figure out the next thing to do, I just picked on the easy target, which was Tristan sitting in front of the TV on the right-hand side of the sofa.
It is fascinating to think about the ways in which so many of our arguments might have absolutely nothing to do with what we actually argue about, right?
And as a journalist, I've been trained to ask, what's the thing behind the thing? And I could not do that in my own life.
Yeah. So let me ask you that question. As you continue to go through this season of discernment, what was the thing behind the thing for you? What would you say was the driving force or the driving question that led to this sort of unknowing, moving away from something towards something that you didn't yet know what that was going to be?
The driving question for me has often, if not always, been where do I belong in the world and who do I belong to? And that question for many of us is answered on multiple levels, right? There's our belonging to God. There's our belonging to a human family. There's a belonging to various circles of community. Obviously, I belonged with my husband. That is a commitment that I made joyfully. And also, one person isn't enough. We need these different layers of relationships as humans wired for connection. I was feeling particularly distant from God at that stage in my life. And I think ultimately that is what led me to seminary, was a desire, a longing, only partially articulated, to deepen my belonging to God, which is honestly going to be life's work. It's not something you get with your degree.
Right. Another phrase that you report on, you said that your husband Tristan said to you, "You don't even know what you want." And I was reminded of, I remember reading a passage, I think it was perhaps in his book, New Seeds of Contemplation, where Thomas Merton says almost exactly that same thing. He says that the thing that makes us unhappy is that we simply do not know what we want. And the hard work of actually discerning what it is that we want. But what did you begin to learn about desire and direction and your own wants during that season?
I began to learn that one needs to be patient with oneself and curious and attentive. The biggest lesson I learned as a farmhand who had very poor skills was about the importance of paying attention to the world around me, noticing the beauty that gets to be our companion along the journey, noticing what grows. Why do we call one plant a weed, but another one is deemed desirable? Is it something inherent about the plant, or is it the fact that we are trying to decide what's useful to us and what's not? What is our relationship with the water or the sky or the air or the things that grow in the garden? It recalibrated, I hope, how I move through the world, recognizing that we are in relationship with so much more than sometimes we acknowledge or realize.
Yeah. So I want to unpack a lot of the things that you learned as a farmhand. But before we get there, so you're in this season of discernment about what you're moving away from and something else to move towards. But what was the experience like for you in coming to the decision to go to seminary?
It was a long process. We actually allowed about a year to make the decision. My husband especially wasn't sure about it. And we formed a discernment team. I think in various traditions, there are what the Quakers call it, a clearness committee.
That's right, yep.
And so we invited 6 people from different parts of our lives to come into conversation with me, to ask me hard questions. And I let my husband pick one of those people because I wanted him to have a stake in the game. And it was fascinating how that process unfolded because there were 1 or 2 people on the team who said right away, yes, you are called. But the 6th person on the team didn't affirm the call until the very last month of the process. And these were people who were diverse in their theological and political convictions and in their life's journeys. We really tried to cover the bases. Obviously, as a gay man, going into seminary is not necessarily the typical thing to do. And my husband chose for the committee someone who doesn't believe that gay marriage can be right with God, which was a fascinating choice. And this friend thought about it for a while, and he said, sure, I will accompany you on this journey. And it was a really special moment. Both of us were in tears. Both this friend and I were in tears when he said, my wife and I had a conversation about it last night. We prayed about it, and we believe you really are called to seminary. To have that gift of accompaniment over 12 months, but not just accompaniment, also vulnerability on his part, that he was willing to cross those lines of conviction to say, yeah, I will come alongside you. I will do this work with you. I will challenge my own convictions for the sake of your future. What a gift. What a humane gift.
Yeah, remarkable. So you go to seminary, Princeton Theological Seminary. How would you describe your experience here? You are a successful journalist in your kind of midlife and going off to seminary. What's kind of like your recollection of your first impressions of what seminary means and entails, and what that experience is like for you?
Look, I'm going to be honest. I was afraid. My brain, when I got back to school, clearly didn't work as well as it did in undergrad. The brain cells, some of them have died. Things have been rewired. I'm sitting there with flashcards trying to memorize Hebrew. It was hard. But the other thing that really struck me about seminary, I guess I had these illusions that people were sitting around having kumbaya moments and thinking deep thoughts about God. And the reality was that a lot of folks were there for a professional degree. There was jockeying for position. Folks were chasing high steeple church positions. It felt so much less like the gorgeous monastery life and much more like just another professional development program. And that saddened me a little bit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that's why I found so much refuge and life at the Farminary.
Yeah.
Because the Farminary was this space where things did grow, where things weren't neat and tidy, where the misfits on campus could find goodness and community.
So describe for folks who are unfamiliar with this recent trend, especially with a number of institutions of higher education and especially seminaries who are exploring agrarian life. You know, how did you see theology? How did you experience theology and agrarian pursuits coming together in something like the Farminary? What's that mean and entail?
Well, it's a reality in Scripture that agrarian life is the backdrop for so much that unfolds. The promised land being described as the land of milk and honey, that is an agrarian picture. The Lord is my shepherd, that is an agrarian picture. So many of the parables that Jesus offers us, from the wheat and the tares to the sheep and the goats, these are agrarian pictures. So much of Scripture is rooted in agrarian life. And I think the Farminary and other programs like it are just recognizing that we can deepen our experience of theological education, but also of the spiritual life if we return to the land. If we go back to the traditions that are common to so many cultures, as well as to the world of the Bible. It makes sense that we should break out of the four walls of the sterile classroom and get out and dig in the soil and care for animals and even grow wheat, which we experimented with at the Farminary. It makes sense if you take the text seriously.
It seems like, is it fair to say that the agrarian realities that you're working with in your book function both literally, realistically? That is, there are points at which you point to those experiences and say, this is the way life is. It concretely is. And at the same time, those realities function metaphorically. That is, that this is the way the spiritual life is, or it's used illustratively of some sort of spiritual idea or spiritual concept. Is that a fair enough to say? And would you unpack some of that?
Well, the danger for the seminarian and for the writer, honestly, is that we harvest more sermon illustrations and metaphors than anything else. We lust for more illustrations and parallels and analogies and similes and metaphors, right? And I think the struggle for some of us at the farm, honestly, was to see the land as it is, to recognize the groundhog and the goldenrod and the zinnias and the Canada geese as creatures in and of themselves, not just something that we could harvest for use in a piece of writing. And it is important to see both of those dimensions. Humans are meaning makers. We want to look around us and grab onto these little footholds, these lenses through which we can understand our spirituality or the realities of our lives, right? But I think that was the risk, to maintain the balance, to find some harmony between the literal and the metaphorical.
Yeah. You said at one point of compost that it was the point, that it seems like waste is where new life begins. So I'm wondering, how has that image changed you, or how have you understood failure, death as parts of the process of life that allow something new to come up?
It was a real surprise to me that the compost pile became my favorite place at the farm. Because on the face of it, on the literal surface of the compost pile, there is death. Banana peels, avocado pits, all the stuff from your fridge that you bought with the best intentions of eating vegetables, but ended up turning moldy or liquefying. It is not a glamorous picture. And also, at the compost pile, you get to see how, through the action of a community, microbes, worms, moisture, air, that rubbish is transformed into something that can carry new life and foster new life, which is to say, good soil. That was a remarkable revelation to me, that God has written into creation itself this natural process where death isn't the end of the story. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course there's grief. Yes, of course there's acknowledgement of failure, for lack of a better word, because I didn't eat that salad kit that I bought with the best of intentions. But waste wasn't the end of the story. Death wasn't the end of the story. There is still new possibility. I have carried that with me into almost every situation since then, because I can be a negative person who wallows in my failures. And to have this literal picture of transformation tucked at the back of my mind, where I get to see that through collaboration with other creatures, something new can come about, that's honestly given me a lot of hope.
Yeah. What sort of formal curriculum was there with the Farminary? What did it mean for you to be a participant in Farminary in this season of life?
When I was a student there from 2016 to 2019, the only formal offering other than a few classes was a certificate, basically a minor for grad school. Mm-hmm. Now they've since added a full master's program for theology and ecology. So you can get, I believe it's an MA that focuses on the Farminary. But when I was there, it was a few classes, one called Ecologies of Faith Formation, that looks at your personal spiritual development and what has shaped your soul and spirit over the course of your life. Another was Soil and Sabbath, where we worked on the farm, but also delved specifically into questions of rest, which is obviously not our society's forte.
Yeah.
I wish there had been more classes when I was a student, but it was just the second year of the Farminary when I arrived.
Yeah.
And it's taken some years to build it out.
Yeah. Of the many things that you observed, noticed, learned, what are things that you regularly carry with you now of that experience that you want to continue to inform your day-to-day life?
One really salient lesson that I learned was the importance of slowing down and paying attention in a world that is constantly full of distraction. The phones that we carry around with us are distraction devices. The algorithms are constantly trying to draw our attention to the flashy thing, the new thing, the immediate thing, and being with the land, sitting by the pond, looking at the evidence of what life has happened there since the last time I was there. I remember going out to the farm after the first snowfall one winter. And for the most part, it was that pristine sheet of white that is postcard perfect. But in one area not far from the pond, there were all these footprints. And it looked as if the Canada geese had had a dance party in the fresh snow. I think 5 years before, I wouldn't have even bothered to walk around the land and to look at the different things that were going on and to realize that it wasn't just flat land, there were undulations. I wouldn't have thought to ask questions about what creatures had been there. But because the farm slowed me down, because the farm told me, yeah, just take 5, 10, 15 minutes to do a big loop around the land. Just draw your attention away from the phone in your pocket. Look up at the sky. Look across the pond. Look down at your feet. What is going on? What life is there? That's something I've tried to do since then, to slow down. There is so much beauty and so much grace around us. And it can help us reframe so much of the overwhelm that is hitting us because of all the things that are constantly trying to grab our attention.
Yeah, I don't know how many years ago it was, but it's been quite a few years now. And I don't do it as often as I used to. I still do it fairly regularly, but we live here in Nashville, and we have a nice sized yard, 1.2 acres. And so if I walk slowly around the perimeter of our yard twice, it takes me about 8-10 minutes. And my general rule of thumb on those walks is to seek to be only present to whatever comes to my senses and simply just to pay attention. And it's remarkable the way that practice has allowed me to kind of, my favorite tree in the yard is a mulberry tree. And that's my friend, also, I always speak to the mulberry tree and a lot of the trees as I go. And I learn things about the shape of the land and the seasonal phases of the various things that grow here in this little 1 acre plot. But there's just something transformative, I think, and grounding about slowing down like that and paying attention. But I don't know, other things like that come to mind about the ways that slowing down has been important to you?
I ask the question, what does it mean to love my neighbor differently now? Because the mulberry tree is your neighbor. You mentioned that the mulberry tree is your friend. That is such a beautiful thing. If the mulberry tree is your friend, what about the creatures that rely on the mulberries? Aren't they also your neighbors? I do things differently now. I was in Nashville not that long ago in early September to give a talk. And a friend said to me, why don't you go downtown and spend a little time with the purple martins? Because every August and into early September, thousands upon thousands of purple martins are passing through on their way to their winter homes. And they roost in the trees right there in downtown Nashville. And what was remarkable to me was I was standing on a corner in downtown Nashville waiting for sunset when the birds come in to roost. Nobody else is looking up. Everybody else is looking either down at their phones or rushing to get somewhere. And suddenly you begin to see these massive dances of clouds of birds in the sky, swooping and swirling and diving, and you can hear their song. And Nashville is such a musical city, yet nobody was listening.
Huh.
And to say nobody is not fair, because there are folks who devote themselves to tracking the purple martins. I mean, at that moment when I was there, it seemed like nobody else was paying attention to these neighbors, these temporary neighbors who pass through every August and September. These are things I wouldn't have thought to do. I'm not a birder. I'm not one of those folks who goes around with an app. But just to be able to stand for half an hour at sunset, watch the change in the sky, not be the center of the story, and let the purple martins do their thing and cultivate that sense of wonder, that's not something I would have done in my past life. I wasn't good at cultivating wonder.
It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today. It has been amazing to me in years of doing interviews and talking to people about, exploring what it means to live a good life and talking about human flourishing and talking about communal flourishing, how repeatedly the practice of simply paying attention has come up. And like you said, we live in this distraction economy, right, where there's so much trying to grab our attention so that we don't pay attention to what's right around us and the beauty right around us. And I'll definitely just kind of second what you just shared there, because I think that, my own paying attention and learning to pay attention to the dogwood trees in our yard, or to the redbud, or to the hydrangeas, the irises, all of these things, it just means my life is so much richer, and I have a much more grounded sense of my place in the world. And to know the kind of the rhythms of this little space, right, and some of the rhythms of Middle Tennessee, it's so rich. So other than learning to not pay so much attention to our telephone, what other kinds of things would you suggest that might be crucial in helping us lean into paying attention?
So I've become a little bit of an evangelist for gardening, and look, I want to be clear. I am not a good gardener. I don't have innate skills.
I am not either.
I have still never successfully grown broccoli or a zucchini even. And I've had people tell me, but zucchini's easy. I have a plot in the community garden, which is 3 blocks from our house here in Grand Rapids. And that space has become something of a sanctuary for me. What it does when I go every spring, summer, fall, every single time I'm there, down on my knees, digging, weeding, harvesting, whatever it is, it reminds me of what is beyond my control. I can't make a seed grow. I can plant a seed, but there is no power in me, no words that I can offer that will make that seed germinate. I have to rely on other forces to collaborate with me. I get to do my tiny part, but then the rain has to come. The sun has to shine. The microbes in the soil, the nutrients have to foster that growth. That is so humbling at a time where humans feel as if we have so much power and control, or at least we lust after power and control. Every single time I'm in the garden, I'm reminded of what is beyond my control. I've been battling Mexican bean beetles all summer long. Sure, I could come at them with some kind of toxic substance, except that it's against the rules of the community garden. But I get to ask the question, what can I do and what can't I do? That is so important right now. That is so important for us to think about what I am actually capable of caring about, as opposed to what are these distractions, these other issues that are noteworthy, sure, but I actually can't do anything about that. And I really need to surrender it and let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that trying to grow things has taught me, again, resonates with what you're describing there. And that is, it just requires such patience on a scale that we humans just do not like to have to be constrained by. So I think, it's, you're typically looking at an annual rhythm, right? And if something doesn't work well this year, you're waiting a year to try again. And then you may have to wait another year to try again. So you learn that the hydrangea doesn't work well in that spot. And so you have to try somewhere else. And then you might or might not get lucky with it being good in that spot. Or the sumac. And we have this gorgeous sumac in our front corner of our yard. And but what I've realized now twice the last 2 years is I'm still overwatering it and I'm still damaging it because it's got too much water, right? So maybe next year, maybe year 3, I'll learn. I don't know. We'll see if I can figure out how much to water it and how much not to water it. But it's so humbling. But again, it's a sort of, well, this is actually the way life is. Life is not on these sorts of hypersonic paces that we want to push ourselves into, but it's this kind of slow rhythm, patient rhythm. And you described that so beautifully, so well. Other major lessons that you've continued to take with you from the Farminary experience?
We don't get to just care about ourselves. We are constantly in relationship, whether we like it or not, with so many other neighbors, to use the word that we were using earlier. And it's not an endeavor that rewards selfishness. We have to pay attention to whether other creatures are struggling or thriving. The work of the farm was so humbling because there were so many moments where I realized one person couldn't do what I was needing to do. The barn door was so heavy that I couldn't close it myself. I guess I could have gone and worked out and built those muscles, but the barn door needed to be closed that night. I had to ask for help. There were constantly these tiny little reminders about the lie of independence and the truth of interdependence, that we exist in community. And in a culture that is so focused on individualism, on self-care, it was so nourishing for me to have those reminders that we were actually built for communal care, that we were never meant to live and thrive alone, that that's actually not possible. Sure, people are annoying all the time, but we need each other.
Yeah.
And we need other creatures too.
Yeah. When you think about the larger tendencies, dispositions of the world around us. I mean, a moment ago, you mentioned, we discussed this tendency we have to be distracted and the need of attention. But what do you see as other potentially destructive tendencies of the culture around us in which you found an antidote in your agrarian experiences?
I think there is a tendency to gloss over the hard things. I noticed my classmates were drawn to, for instance, the most classically beautiful aspects of the farm. What showed up on Instagram were the gorgeous bouquets of flowers that we put together and the adorable chicks. Well, those chicks go through an adolescent phase where they're really not that cute. Nobody was posting those photos. And there's a season when there are no zinnias, no cosmos, no goldenrod, no gomphrena. The farm is actually looking pretty brown and gray. And I was pretty alone on the farm during those seasons. What does it mean to acknowledge all the different stages of life? What does it look like not to gloss over grief? What calls us to pay attention to the awkwardness of adolescence and not pretend that it's not there? I think that's really important. We are not a society that knows how to grieve well. We're not a society that comes alongside folks who are in awkward spots. And we don't know how to sit patiently with that. I've lost count of how many times in my church work folks say really weird things during coffee hour because we don't have those muscles. We are so atomized in our lives, each going to our own single family homes or our apartments where more and more people live alone. A lot of those social interactions that require a little bit of care, a little bit of willing to step into discomfort and acknowledge the not easy, potentially awkward thing. It matters. It matters for us to be able to take in the whole scope of life and accompany each other through all those different seasons.
Somewhat related, but I was fascinated where at one point you say, I confess I'm among those who fetishize things like wilderness and old growth forests and how things used to be, but there has never been an unchanging ecosystem. And I find that very helpful because I too can kind of tend to, nostalgia of the wild wilderness. But unpack that some for us.
Every piece of land has stories, and we can tend to fixate on something that looks good on a postcard and want to keep that thing preserved for all time. But that doesn't acknowledge that before this was this kind of forest, there were other trees who came in and colonized that land and made it possible for the current forest to thrive. There was a time when maybe these kinds of birds didn't live here, and then they moved in, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not so good reasons. Everything is changing, just like we're always changing. I think what I'm hoping to encourage folks to do is to acknowledge the layers of story, not just in the world around us, but also within us, that there is goodness and grief in all these stages, that change happens. And the question is really, how do we acknowledge that change and what do we do with that change, as opposed to pretending that change won't be inflicted on us?
Yeah. Yeah, very helpful. Earlier, you spoke of belonging and the crucial desire, need we have. And in your chapter entitled Belonging, which is, I think, an especially beautiful chapter, you ask, is there any human sentiment more primal or universal? You hear it in babies' cries for their parents' embrace. You glimpse it on a first date or at a job interview, in the nervous fumbling for connection. And that in that early season that ended up leading you to seminary, you were, among other things, asking the question, where do you belong? And you share in the book several key ways that you've grappled with the question of belonging yourself as a gay man, who's a Christian, as a Chinese American. And there's another passage, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but you talked about how in trying to talk about these things, the challenge that it is to talk about these things, because on the one hand, you don't want to tell your stories in such a way so that it's a sort of bid for sympathy or some sort of way that puts down other people or dishonors others. But as you think about that kind of desire for belonging and your own particular history, what are some of the key things that you've had to navigate, or some of the key things that you've learned in having to navigate some of those realities?
One of the biggest things has been accepting that belonging is not some off-the-shelf commodity that I can just buy. Mm-hmm. That it is a long-term project to feel belonging, but also to create belonging for others. That we get to choose how we show up for ourselves and for one another in the world. As a Christian, as an ordained clergyman, I definitely have a perspective on this that is informed by my faith. One of the best teachers I've ever had is an Episcopal theologian named Kwok Pui Lan, who is from Hong Kong, like my family is. And I wondered one time, I asked her how she just seemed to move through the world with such grace. And she spent a lot of her career teaching in the U.S. She definitely still has a Hong Kong accent. There's no mistaking that she's not an American. And she looked at me almost with pity, I feel like. And she said, I know I belong to God. And I remind myself of that everywhere I go. And everywhere I go, I get to invite other people into belonging. So it's as if she walks around, moves through the world, gets on airplanes, goes to different seminaries and universities with this cloud of belonging that she's willing to invite others into. And she's grounded in her conviction that she matters to God. I'm not there yet. I'll be totally honest. I don't have a cloud. Maybe I have a couple puffs of steam on a good day.
Yeah.
But that perspective, that posture was so compelling to me that we should be so grounded in our belovedness, that we just exude that to other people, that the random person I would meet in just a casual interaction would feel a sense of care, a sense of mattering. That's what I aspire to anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reality is I'm piecing it together slowly. And there are good days and there are bad days. There are days when I'm jet lagged. There are days when I snap at my husband or I'm shorter in conversation than I would like because I don't have the capacity. On another layer, I experienced what a lot of kids of immigrants experienced, which was being made fun of for what I had in my lunch or the shape of my eyes or the language that I grew up speaking, which is Cantonese. That's normal. It's not great, but it's normal. And one of the growth areas as an adult has been to honor the culture that my grandparents and my parents gave me, to celebrate the food that smells a little different, but that actually gives me delight because it connects me to my people. To find new ways to express the belonging that can come from honoring my ancestors by making fried rice, for instance. And I get to share that with others. I get to expand the tradition. I get to reimagine it. So, for instance, the dish that really sums up my little household that I've been able to share with others, that I got to go cook for a friend last week, is brisket fried rice. Because my husband, Tristan, he's from Texas. My family's from Hong Kong. And our cultures meet in brisket fried rice. The smokiness and the fat of that brisket melting into the rice, it's a gorgeous thing. I don't think I would have imagined that if I hadn't done some work to imagine what belonging could be.
Yeah.
To see how to stretch the story so that it really reflects where I've come from as well as who I am becoming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful thread in your book, where you note how when you were a boy that there were occasions where you would hide your lunch so that your classmates would not make fun of you for the odd smells to them. And then you close with a recipe of your grandmother's fried rice. And again, it seems to me that one of the ways in which we cultivate this kind of sense of belonging to ourselves is finding a way back to ourselves, right? Is finding a way to in some new way back to reclaim our roots and reclaim the people that we are as young people. So yeah, that's beautiful. What's been the journey for you with regard to being a gay ordained Christian?
It has been a really long journey. I am in the Reformed Church in America, a denomination that has a long history in the U.S., started by the Dutch colonizers in the 17th century in what is now New York, but was then New Amsterdam. And the RCA has, like so much of society, like so much of the religious world, has had bitter fights over the place of queer people in their midst. So it was an 8-year journey for me to ordination when the standard is 3 years. And a lot of folks said to me, why don't you just go somewhere else? Why don't you just find a different denomination? And that might have been the right choice for some folks. But as my husband and I talked over it over the years, because we had plenty of years to talk about it, we felt that my call was to this particular denomination. If the folks with power were to say no, that was their place. It's interesting, in a lot of parts of American culture, there is a slight passive aggressiveness where folks want you to make the decision for them when it's an uncomfortable decision. And I just wasn't willing to do that. Maybe it's just stubbornness more than call. I don't know. Or maybe call can be manifested in stubbornness. But I wasn't willing to say no when it was someone else's job to say yes or no. And eventually, I guess I outweighted the folks who were opposed to it. Denominations are a funny thing. I don't think that I am defined by my denomination. Yes, I'm ordained in a particular denomination, but when I took my ordination vows, my promise was not to free the captives just in this denomination or comfort the grieving just in this denomination. The call is a universal one. Wherever I go, it's a ridiculous promise that those of us who kneel and get ordained make. But the promise is for the world. I have to meet folks wherever they are. Some days I'm good at that. Some days I'm not. I do think as someone who is gay, as someone who is Chinese in a not predominantly Chinese culture, I did get some superpowers that help me see folks who are on the margins of the room, that help me to look maybe with a wider lens than someone who has spent their entire life in the middle of the room. And I'm grateful for that. I've grown to a point where I'm grateful for my sexuality. I'm grateful for my minoritized status because it has helped me to see things and feel things that maybe some folks haven't had the chance to feel. Because I've experienced shame, for instance, I never want a single person to experience shame. I've been humiliated publicly for who I am, for how I was made. I never want anyone, not my worst enemy, to experience humiliation. I'm grateful for those experiences. I wasn't grateful in the moment, but I'm grateful for them now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. When you think back to that, were you 39 when you made the decision to go to seminary? Yeah. When you think back to that 39-year-old standing there, I think you said the 29th floor of that skyscraper, and in these intervening years, all the things you've learned, what would you say are some of the if you think about that as like a chapter of your life, how would you describe that chapter of life of discernment into seminary? What would be the chapter title? And then what would be the chapter title for the chapter of life you're in now?
I don't think it would be different chapter titles because, I could demarcate it based on what I was doing. But honestly, I'm just a pilgrim trying to stumble through it all and make sense of it. And that hasn't changed. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to do it faithfully and well. I don't know what the path forward is, but I'm trying to take things step by step in gratitude for where I've been and in hope of the goodness that is to come. My husband and I have talked about how we, given the state of the world, don't really make long-term plans anymore. 5-year plans, 10-year plans, yeah, we're trying to save for retirement. But also, if you had told me 5 years ago or 10 years ago that this is where we would be as a society, I would have been really sad, but I wouldn't necessarily have believed you. So I'm just trying to show up faithfully wherever I'm invited to go. I'm just trying to cultivate a little bit of goodness, glimpse a little bit of beauty, because that's the sustenance that I think I need, that I think we need for the journey ahead.
Well, I'd kind of like, as we move toward our conclusion here, to end where you end your chapter on telos, this Greek word for end or goal or perfection. And that chapter, at least in part, strikes me as a meditation on friendship. And so give us a bit of closing admonition, encouragement to envision the great moral adventure of friendship, what that's meant for you, what it might mean for us as we seek to lean into that ourselves.
We need friendship. We need each other. None of us is going to flourish in this life alone. The invitation is there for us to be loved and to love. I don't think any of us can love well until we've recognized the love that we've received. Every one of us can summon some moment, particularly maybe as a kid, when we felt free, when we felt loved. Some of us had harder childhoods than others, so it might just be a moment, not an extended stretch of time. But maybe there was the day that someone surprised you with an ice cream cone. Or maybe it was a moment where you were unexpectedly delighted by a movie that you got to go to the cinema to see. How did it feel to be loved and known and seen and free? That's what we get to create for each other, to expand those moments, to let people know that they're not alone in the mess of life. That's what friendship means to me. And it's something I'm going to be practicing till the day I die. How do I be a good neighbor? How do I be a good friend, whether to the human or to that mulberry tree?
Been talking to Jeff Chu, author most recently of Good Soil, The Education of an Accidental Farmhand. Jeff, thanks so much for the lovely conversation and the lovely new book. And best wishes to you. Enjoy in your continued good work in the world.
Thank you so much, Lee.
When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
This is Jason Momoa, and I'll be your finance professor today. Welcome to Banking Smarter 101 with Chime. Bam! First lesson, sign up for Chime and set up direct deposit. You'll be joining millions of members banking fee-free. Second lesson, get cash back on eligible purchases while building credit and a higher APY on your savings. That's how you bank smarter this season. Fa-la-la-la-la, class dismissed. Join Chime today.
Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and a secure Chime Visa credit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. Members FDIC. Optional services and products may have fees or charges. Details at chime.com/feesinfo. With a qualifying direct deposit, earn 1.5% cash back on eligible secure Chime Visa credit card purchases. On-time payment history may have a positive impact on your credit score. Results may vary. APY means annual percentage yield. Learn about credit building and more at chime.com.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.
Whether it's in Drive, Dropbox, Slack, or that folder called Ugh, Dropbox Dash finds it fast. Smart Search. Built for messy humans. Learn more at dropbox.com/dash.